I never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these, but honestly, I don't know who else to talk to. My life completely shattered about 3 months ago, and I'm still digging myself out of the wreckage. If you looked at my life last year, you would have thought I had it all figured out. I'm 28, I work as a project manager for a tech firm in downtown Austin, and I had just bought my first townhouse in a really nice, quiet suburb right outside the city loop. I had a 3-year relationship with a woman named Maya, who I was entirely convinced was my forever. Maya was everything I wasn't. Vibrant, spontaneous, an artist who brought color into my structured, spreadsheet-driven world. We were talking about rings, looking at registries, and planning a future that felt as solid as concrete. Then there was Julian. Julian had been my absolute best friend since our freshman year at UT Austin. We were roommates in the dorms, survived the grueling engineering and business weed-out classes together, and stayed tight even as our lives took different paths. While I climbed the corporate ladder, Julian tried to make it as a freelance graphic designer, floating from contract to contract, living that classic nomadic, unstable lifestyle. He was the kind of guy everyone loved, charismatic, effortlessly handsome, and fiercely loyal. Or so I thought. When Julian called me on a rainy Tuesday evening last October, sounding completely broken, my instinct wasn't to ask questions.
It was just to help. He told me his latest long-term client had backed out without paying him. His landlord in East Austin was evicting him, and he had nowhere to go. He sounded smaller than I'd ever heard him. Maya was sitting next to me on our sectional couch, sipping her wine, and when I told her what was happening, she immediately nodded. She told us we had to help him, that what kind of friends would we be if we let Julian sleep in his car? Looking back, that moment was the first domino. That very weekend, I drove my truck over to his cramped studio apartment, helped him pack his life into cardboard boxes, and brought him into my home. The arrangement was simple, or at least it was supposed to be. He was going to crash on our massive L-shaped living room couch for a few weeks until he landed a new corporate gig and could afford a security deposit on a new place. I didn't charge him rent. I didn't even ask him to pitch in for groceries. I just wanted my brother to get back on his feet. The first couple of weeks were actually great. It felt like a college reunion. We'd crack open beers after I got home from the office, watch the NBA playoffs, and Maya would cook these massive dinners for the three of us. Julian was incredibly grateful, always making sure the kitchen was spotless before we woke up, running errands for Maya, and taking care of our golden retriever, Jax. He blended into our daily routine seamlessly. Too seamlessly, maybe. As the weeks turned into 2 months, the dynamics started to shift in ways that were so subtle I completely missed them at the time. My job got incredibly demanding as we approached the end of the fiscal year. I was putting in 60-hour weeks, leaving the house before the sun came up and rolling back into the driveway long after dark, utterly exhausted. Maya, who worked from home doing interior design consulting, was spending all day in the house, and since Julian was still hunting for full-time work, he was there too. I started noticing little things when I would come home. I'd walk through the front door at 8 p.m. and they would be sitting at the kitchen island, laughing hysterically at some inside joke. The moment I walked into the room, the laughter would taper off, replaced by this polite, welcoming energy that felt just a tiny bit forced. Maya would immediately jump up to microwave my dinner, asking how my day was, but her eyes would constantly dart back to Julian. I brushed it off. I told myself I was just tired, maybe a little envious that they got to hang out and relax while I was grinding at the office to pay the mortgage. I trusted them both implicitly. Maya was the love of my life, and Julian was the guy who held my hair back in college, the guy who knew every secret I had. They were the two pillars of my world. One Friday in mid-December, my company was hosting its annual winter gala at a high-end hotel downtown. It was a massive deal, an all-hands-on-deck event where I was supposed to network with the regional executives. Maya had been planning her outfit for weeks, a stunning emerald green dress that she looked absolutely breathtaking in. But around 3 p.m. that afternoon, while I was already at the hotel helping the event staff set up the AV equipment and stage, she texted me. She said she had developed a sudden, blinding migraine. She apologized profusely, saying she could barely open her eyes and that she was going to take some medicine and pass out in the dark. I felt a pang of disappointment, but mostly I just felt bad for her. I texted her back telling her not to worry, to stay hydrated, and that I'd see her late tonight. I even texted Julian, asking him to check on her and make sure Jax didn't bark too loud and wake her up. He replied within seconds,
Got you covered, man. Go crush it tonight. The gala went well, but by 10:30 p.m., the heavy drinking and corporate small talk started to wear on me. I was exhausted, my shoulders ached, and honestly, I just wanted to go home, curl up next to my girlfriend, and sleep for 12 hours. I slipped out of the ballroom without making a scene, grabbed my coat from the valet, and hopped into my truck. The drive home took about 25 minutes. The highway was mostly empty, the dashboard lights casting a dull blue glow over my hands as I steered through the quiet Texas night. I remember feeling this wave of immense gratitude as I pulled into our subdivision. I thought about how lucky I was to have a beautiful home, a woman I adored, and a best friend who had my back. When I turned down our street, I noticed the house was completely dark, which made sense given the time and Maya's migraine. I pulled into the driveway, cutting the headlights so I wouldn't shine them through the front windows. I unlocked the front door as quietly as possible, slipping my shoes off in the entryway. The house was dead silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator and the air conditioning. Jax didn't even come to greet me at the door, which I found a little odd, but I figured he was probably asleep in the guest bedroom or downstairs with Julian. I tiptoed up the hardwood stairs, using the flashlight on my phone to guide my steps. As I reached the top landing, I noticed the door to our master bedroom was cracked open just an inch, a faint, warm light spilling out onto the carpet. I smiled, thinking Maya might be feeling better and reading a book. But as I got closer, I heard a sound that made my chest tighten. It wasn't the sound of someone watching TV or turning pages. It was a soft, rhythmic whispering, followed by a low, familiar laugh that didn't belong to my girlfriend. My heart did a strange, violent flutter in my ribs. I froze, my hand hovering over the door handle. Every instinct in my body told me to turn around, to believe it was something innocent, to think the TV was just playing a movie. But the air in the hallway felt suddenly freezing cold. Through the narrow gap in the door, I didn't see Maya sleeping. I saw Julian's jacket thrown carelessly across our accent chair. And then I heard Maya's voice, a breathless, intimate tone she had only ever used with me, whispering his name. I stood frozen in the dark hallway, my hand still hovering inches from the brass doorknob. The silence of the house had transformed into something suffocating, heavy with a truth I wasn't ready to face. For a fraction of a second, my brain tried to construct an alternate reality. I told myself Julian was just helping her because her migraine got worse. I told myself I was mishearing the tone of her voice. But the human mind can only lie to itself for so long before raw reality forces its way through. I pushed the door open. It didn't slam. It just glided on its hinges with a faint, agonizing creak. The warm light I had seen was coming from the single lamp on Maya's nightstand, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. There they were, on the bed I had picked out, under the duvet we had chosen together for our anniversary. Julian was sitting up against the headboard, his shirt completely gone, and Maya was draped across him, her head resting on his bare chest. She wasn't wearing her pajamas. She was wearing one of my oversized college t-shirts, the one she always stole from my drawer when we were having a lazy Sunday. They were looking down at Julian's phone, their faces illuminated by the screen, sharing a quiet, lazy smile that belonged to two people who had done this 100 times before. The moment the door opened wide, their heads snapped toward me in unison. The transition on their faces from absolute comfort to pure, unadulterated terror is something that will be burned into my retinas for the rest of my life. The color drained from Maya's face so fast, she looked like a ghost. She let out a sharp, choked gasp, instantly scrambling backward, pulling the covers up to her chin as if she could hide what was already completely exposed. Julian didn't move for a second. He just stared at me, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open, caught entirely off guard. "Austin," Julian stammered, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat, trying to find his footing, trying to find that effortless charisma that had always gotten him out of trouble. "Bro, wait, it's not... Let me explain, man, it's not what it looks like." It is the most cliché, pathetic phrase in the human language, and hearing it come out of my best friend's mouth in my own bedroom made something inside me snap. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. The anger that hit me wasn't hot and loud.
It was ice cold and paralyzing. I felt my vision narrow until all I could see were the two of them.
"Get out of my bed," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was incredibly quiet, but it filled the entire room. "Austin, please, baby, just listen to me." Maya started to sob, the tears instantly spilling over her cheeks. She reached a hand out toward me, her fingers trembling. "I had a migraine and I was so lonely and we were just talking. I swear we were just talking." "Do not call me that," I interrupted, staring directly at her. The hypocrisy of her tears made me feel physically sick. "Do not speak to me. Julian, get out of this bed right now, or I swear to God I will throw you out of that window." Julian didn't argue. The realization of what he had done, or perhaps the fear of what a 6'2" furious man could do to him, kicked him into survival mode. He slid out of the bed, grabbing his jeans from the floor, scrambling to pull them on while keeping his eyes on me the entire time, as if he expected me to lung at him. He looked pathetic. The cool, confident guy who always knew what to say was reduced to a shaking, stuttering mess in the corner of my room. I backed out into the hallway, giving him space to leave because I knew if he got within arm's reach of me inside that bedroom, I might actually lose control. I walked down the stairs, my boots heavy on the wood, and waited by the front door. Maya was upstairs crying loudly now, a hysterical, hyperventilating sound that echoed down the stairwell, but I couldn't care less. A minute later, Julian came down the stairs. He had his shoes in his hand and his shirt half-buttoned. He stopped 3 steps from the bottom, looking at me with a mix of guilt and sheer panic. "Austin, man, I am so sorry," he whispered, his eyes welling up. "I swear we never meant for this to happen. It got out of hand. I'm so sorry, bro." "You were my brother," I said, my voice barely a whisper. That was the part that cut the deepest. The woman I loved had betrayed me, yes, but the guy standing in front of me had been my anchor for a decade. I had brought him into my house. I had fed him. I had protected him. "You have 10 minutes to grab whatever can fit in your car. If you are still in this house in 11 minutes, I am calling the police and telling them you broke in." "Austin, it's freezing outside. Where am I supposed to go?" he asked, a desperate note of entitlement creeping into his voice. "I don't give a damn if you freeze on the sidewalk," I said, opening the front door and pointing to the dark driveway. "Get your shit and get out." He saw the look in my eyes and realized there was no negotiating. He spent the next 5 minutes frantically shoving his clothes and his laptop into his duffel bags in the living room, the heavy silence broken only by the sound of zippers and his ragged breathing. He didn't look at me again as he walked out the front door, dragging his bags behind him. The door clicked shut, and a moment later I heard his crappy sedan start up in the driveway, the headlights sweeping across the living room walls as he backed out and drove away into the night. Then there was only Maya. I walked back into the living room and sat down on the couch Julian had been sleeping on for the past 2 months. The cushion still held the faint scent of his cologne. It was nauseating. A few minutes later, I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She had changed into a pair of sweatpants and a sweater, her face swollen and red from crying. She stopped at the edge of the living room, gripping the doorframe as if she couldn't support her own weight. "Are you going to let me explain?" she whispered, her voice raw. I looked up at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt absolutely nothing. The warmth, the adoration, the future I had imagined with her, it had all evaporated into thin air the moment I opened that bedroom door. "Explain what, Maya?" I asked, my voice flat. "Explain how long it's been going on? Explain how you waited for me to leave for work every morning so you could slide into bed with my best friend? Explain how you lied about a migraine today just so you could have him in our bed while I was working a corporate event?" "It wasn't like that," she sobbed, dropping to her knees on the rug a few feet away from me. "It only started a couple of weeks ago. You were never home, Austin. You were always at the office, always working, always talking about spreadsheets and projects. I felt so invisible. Julian was he was here. He listened to me. He made me feel seen. It was a mistake, a horrible, stupid mistake. But I love you. I want to marry you, Austin. Please, don't throw everything away for one mistake." Hearing her blame my work ethic, the very work ethic that was paying for the roof over her head, the very work ethic that was going to fund the wedding she wanted, was the final nail in the coffin. The sheer selfishness of her justification was staggering.
She wasn't sorry she hurt me. She was sorry she got caught. I sat there on that couch, listening to her cry on the floor, and the room felt entirely surreal. Her words floated through the air like a bad movie script, hitting me but not sinking in. She was begging, pulling at the fabric of my sweatpants, saying my name over and over again, as if it were a magic spell that could undo the last 2 hours. But every time I looked at her, all I could see was the image of her face lit up by that phone screen upstairs, looking at Julian like he was the center of her universe. "Get up off the floor, Maya," I said, my voice completely drained of emotion. I didn't want the theater of her despair. It felt performed, a desperate attempt to manipulate my guilt because I was the one who worked long hours. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, looking up at me with wide, bloodshot eyes. "Austin, please. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. People get past things like this all the time. Our families, our friends, what are we going to tell them? We were building a life together." "You tore the life down," I said, leaning back against the cushions. "You and Julian. You took everything we had and you threw a match on it. And the worst part is, you're sitting here trying to tell me it's because I was working. I was working for us, Maya. Every single hour I spent at that office was to make sure we could have the wedding you wanted, the house you wanted, the future you talked about every single day. And you rewarded me by bringing him into our bed." "It was just a stupid, lonely moment," she argued, her voice rising in defensive panic. "It didn't mean anything to either of us. It was just text messages at first, and then it happened. It's not like I love him, Austin. I love you. If you loved me, you wouldn't have been able to look me in the eye when I came home every night," I said, the truth of it hitting me like a physical blow. I started remembering all the times over the past month where I'd come home exhausted, and she'd kiss my cheek, ask about my day, and then go sit next to Julian. How many times had they laughed at me behind my back? How many times had they waited for the garage door to close so they could laugh about how clueless I was? The psychological horror of the betrayal was setting in, rewriting every good memory I had from the last 60 days into a sickening lie. I stood up, unable to sit in that space anymore. "I'm going to sleep in the guest room. Tonight, you stay in our room. Tomorrow morning, I want you to call your mom or your sister and tell them you need a place to stay. I don't care what excuse you give them, but you need to be packed and gone by Sunday night." "Austin, no, please don't do this," she wailed, reaching out for me again, but I stepped back, completely out of her reach. "If you're still here on Monday morning," I said, keeping my voice as steady as steel, "I will pack your things myself and leave them on the curb, and then I'm calling your parents and telling them exactly why you don't live here anymore." She froze at that. The threat of her family finding out seemed to sober her up faster than anything else. Maya came from a very tight-knit traditional family in Dallas. Her parents adored me, and her dad had already welcomed me into the family like a son. The thought of them knowing she had ruined her life over a broke, couch-surfing graphic designer was clearly terrifying to her. She swallowed hard, her mouth trembling, but she didn't say another word. She just stood up, her head bowed, and walked slowly back up the stairs, her feet dragging on the wood. I walked into the small guest bedroom down the hall, shut the door, and locked it. I didn't even turn on the lights. I just threw myself face down onto the mattress, still wearing my corporate clothes from the gala. I didn't sleep a single wink that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the loop started over. The creak of the door, the warm light of the lamp, the way her head was resting on his chest, the raw shock on their faces. It played on a continuous, agonizing cycle behind my eyelids. Jax, my golden retriever, came and scratched at the guest room door around 3 a.m. I let him in, and he immediately hopped onto the bed, burying his heavy head into my side. I wrapped my arms around his neck, and that was the only time I let myself cry. I cried quietly into his fur for an hour, mourning the loss of the two people I had trusted more than anyone else in the world. The next morning, the house was dead silent. I stayed in the guest room until I heard the faint sound of Maya moving around upstairs, followed by the sound of packing tape ripping. Every crackle of that tape felt like a stitch being torn out of my chest, but it was also a relief. She was actually leaving. Around noon, I came downstairs to get some water. The living room was already different. The clutter Julian had left behind was gone, and there were 3 large suitcases sitting by the front door. Maya was in the kitchen, her face pale and devoid of any expression. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "My sister is coming to pick me up around 3, she said, her voice completely flat, not looking at me.
"Okay," I replied, grabbing a glass from the cabinet. "I left the house keys on the kitchen island," she continued, her hands shaking slightly as she leaned against the counter. "I'm taking my clothes and my personal items. The rest of the stuff, the furniture, the decorations we bought, you can do whatever you want with it. Throw it away, burn it, I don't care." "I will," I said. She looked up at me then, a flash of her old intensity returning to her eyes. "Are we really just done, Austin? 3 years, just like that? You're not even going to try to fight for us?" I set my glass down on the counter and looked back at her. The anger had mostly faded, replaced by a massive, hollow crater of disappointment. "You didn't fight for us when you let him into our bedroom, Maya. You didn't think about our 3 years then. Why should I be the one to fight for something you already destroyed?" She didn't have an answer for that. She just turned her back to me and walked out to the porch to wait for her sister. At exactly 2:45 p.m., a white SUV pulled into the driveway. Maya's sister didn't get out of the car. She just popped the trunk. Maya dragged her suitcases out the front door, loaded them in, and got into the passenger seat without looking back at the house once. As the SUV drove away, the silence that settled over the townhouse was deafening. I thought the hardest part was over. I thought that once they were both gone, I could start processing the pain and moving on.
But I was completely wrong. The real nightmare was about to begin, because 2 days later, I received an email from Julian's old corporate email address, a draft he had accidentally left synced to a shared Google Drive we used for freelance projects years ago. It was a timeline of messages, notes, and photos that showed this hadn't started a few weeks ago. It had been going on for almost the entire time he was living under my roof. The email notification popped up on my laptop screen at 9 p.m. on Tuesday. I was sitting at the kitchen island, staring at a half-eaten takeout container, trying to distract myself with work. Seeing Julian's name in my inbox made my stomach instantly drop. It wasn't a direct email to me. It was an automated sync notification from an old, forgotten shared folder we had created back in college to swap portfolio designs. He had accidentally dropped a password-protected zip file into the drive, likely frantically backing up his local laptop storage onto whatever cloud accounts you still had active after I kicked him out. The file name was just a string of random numbers, but curiosity, or maybe a masochistic need for the absolute truth, overrode my hesitation. I clicked into the folder. Because the drive was technically under my administrative account from years ago, I had master access to the unencrypted temporary local cache he had left behind. I opened the document inside. It wasn't just a handful of messages. It was a digital diary of my own destruction. There were screenshots of text threads dating all the way back to October, literally 4 days after Julian moved onto my couch. I sat there in the dark kitchen, the blue light of the screen reflecting off my face, reading the exact timeline of how the 2 people I loved most had systematically dismantled my life. The very first screenshot was a text from Maya to Julian, sent at 11:30 a.m. on a Friday while I was sitting in a quarterly budget meeting at work. It read, "Austin just texted he's stuck at the office until 8 p.m. again. Want to grab lunch downtown? My treat." Julian's response was immediate. "Always down for a free meal from a beautiful woman. Let's go to that sushi place on 4th. As I scrolled down, the messages grew progressively more intimate, more calculated, and infinitely more cruel. They hadn't just fallen into a mistake because of a lonely evening or a sudden moment of weakness. It was an ongoing, thrilling game for them. They would text each other from opposite ends of my own house while I was sitting right there in the room with them. I found a screenshot from November on a night we were all watching a football game together on the couch. I remembered that night vividly. I had bought a fancy rack of ribs, grilled them for everyone, and felt so happy to have my best friend and my girlfriend getting along so well. The timestamp on the screenshot was 9:15 p.m. I had gone to the bathroom for 5 minutes. Maya had texted Julian, "He has no idea. You look so hot in that sweater tonight, by the way."
Julian had replied, "Careful, he's going to see you looking at me. Wait until he goes to sleep." My hands started to shake so violently I could barely track the mousepad. The sheer level of sociopathic deception was breathtaking. I had been sitting mere feet away from them, completely blind, wrapped up in the exhaustion of my career and the comfort of my security, while they used my home, my resources, and my trust as a playground for their affair. The worst part wasn't the text, though. It was a series of notes Julian had written in a digital journaling app, seemingly trying to justify his actions to himself, or maybe just documenting the thrill of it. In one note, dated late November, he wrote, "Austin has always had everything handed to him. The corporate job, the nice house, the perfect girl. He doesn't even appreciate what he has. He just works and stares at spreadsheets. Maya needs someone who actually lives in the real world. If he's going to ignore her to chase a promotion, he deserves whatever happens next." Reading those words felt like a physical fist striking my chest. The entitlement, the deep-seated jealousy that my best friend had harbored toward me for years, completely unmasked. I had opened my doors to him because I thought he was drowning and needed a lifeline. In reality, he had entered my home with a quiet resentment, waiting for the perfect opportunity to take the things he felt I didn't deserve. I closed the laptop with a heavy slam. The silence of the house came rushing back in, but the pain wasn't cold anymore. It was burning. The sadness and the hollow disappointment evaporated, completely replaced by a searing, white-hot rage. They had tried to paint this as a tragic mistake born out of loneliness and my long hours at the office. They had tried to make me share the blame for their betrayal. But this digital footprint proved that it was malicious, pre-planned, and entirely selfish. I didn't call Maya. I didn't text Julian. I didn't give them the satisfaction of knowing they had broken me further. Instead, I spent the rest of the night systematically removing every trace of them from my life. I downloaded the entire archive file, saved it to an external hard drive, and uploaded it to a private folder. Then I composed a single email. I sent it to Maya's father, her mother, and her sister. I attached the timeline, the screenshots, and Julian's journal entry detailing exactly how long they had been lying to everyone. I didn't write an angry essay. I didn't drop insults. I just wrote, "Dear Dave and Susan, I think you deserve to know the real reason Maya moved back to Dallas. I loved your daughter, and I respected your family, but I cannot protect her from the consequences of her own choices anymore. Goodbye." Next, I opened my LinkedIn network. Julian was attempting to rebuild his freelance business by pitching to several local marketing firms in Austin, firms where I held significant professional leverage and knew the hiring directors personally. I took the screenshots of his journal entries regarding his lack of ethics, his deception, and his complete disregard for trust, and I sent them directly to 3 managing partners who had been considering him for long-term contract work. I didn't have to say much. In the corporate world, a man who will systematically betray his closest friend while living under his roof is considered an extreme liability. His professional reputation in the city was dead by sunrise. By the time the sun started to peek over the horizon on Wednesday morning, casting long amber rays across my empty living room, I felt completely exhausted, but uniquely clean. The wreckage was immense, and the future I had envisioned was entirely gone, replaced by an open, terrifying blank slate. I walked out onto the back patio with Jax, holding a hot cup of black coffee. The Texas morning air was crisp and cool. The pain didn't go away. I knew it wouldn't for a very long time. Every time I walked past the guest room or looked at the empty space on the sectional, I'd feel that sharp, familiar pang of betrayal. But as I watched the neighborhood slowly wake up, I realized something incredibly important. They hadn't taken my future. They had only taken a lie. The woman I loved didn't actually exist. She was a character played by someone who didn't possess the capacity for real loyalty. The best friend I had championed for a decade was just a shadow of a person, driven by envy and weakness. By pulling back that curtain, as agonizing as it was, I had freed myself from a life built on a foundation of sand. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the coffee mug against my palms, and looked down at my dog. I was 28 years old. I had a great career, a beautiful home that was entirely mine, and the absolute truth. The recovery was going to take months, maybe years, of rebuilding my ability to trust another human being. But as I watched the sun climb higher into the sky, I knew I was going to be completely fine. I had survived the worst thing the two closest people in my world could do to me, and I was still standing.